Good morning. Hello, folks. Well, welcome. We have a wonderful panel for you guys today. We are talking about building powerful teams with a core component to that being diverse minds, diverse backgrounds, diverse people. And so I'm Anne-Marie Zettlemoyer. I'm the Vice President of Security Engineering at MasterCard and a fellow at the National Security Institute. Joining me today is Juliet, who is the CEO and President of Revolutionary Cyber. Jitendra Chandra. Did I say that right, Jitendra?
It's Jitendra Chandana.
See? Chandra. Jitendra
Yeah.
Chandra. So I'm having camera issues. Who is, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves in a moment. And I have Devon Rollins from Capital One. Jitendra, if you would start with a quick introduction of yourself, what you do, what you love, why this is important to you, that would be great. And we'll follow up with Jules and Devon.
Yeah, Jitendra Chandana. I'm the CISO at Department of Human Services in the state of Maryland. And going on to an interesting cloud transformation that will transform human services, and it's first of the kind implementation in the entire country. Very excited about that. And I enjoyed spending time. Two grown kids now, teenagers, so I have a lot of discussions about various topics, and diversity and inclusion being one of them. We discuss a lot, actually. So interesting.
Awesome. Well, welcome and thanks for being here. Jules,
Devon?
take it away.
Hi, I am Jules Okafor. I am an attorney, but also the CEO and founder of Revolution Cyber. The company's been around for about 2 years. We focus on delivering security culture as a service. And one of the core components of that is the diversity of teams and ensuring high performance by building out productivity gains across people and people's skills. One of the elements you're hearing me talk about quite a bit is cyber diplomacy, and that's one of the terms we've coined, and that'll be critical to what we discuss today. So happy to learn more and share more about, my background.
Fantastic. Devon, tell us about yourself. Well, we lost you. Your camera. Oh, maybe he'll come back in.
Yes.
So I am convinced, and I've said this a few times this week, actually, I am convinced that there is a Skype, Zoom, name your platform poltergeist that just loves to torment me whenever I'm doing speaking events or any type of meeting.
Yeah.
So I apologize because you guys are bearing the fruit of that. So we're going to hydrate.
Wow, it's interesting that I hit the mute button. Disappeared. So,
yeah.
But by way of very quick introductions, my name is Devon Rollins. I am a senior director at Capital One in our cyber engineering organization. I lead the development and deployment of our platforms related to security monitoring. I'm very excited and moved by all things automation, machine learning, cyber intelligence. I have been doing this body of work for well over a decade. My foray into this discussion, particularly around diversity and inclusion and belonging, has much to do with how I've spent my time both building teams, but also in crafting and creating culture and ensuring that there's psychological safety, thinking a lot and extensively about how a variety of perspectives and experiences can help inform how we think about protecting our customers ultimately.
So this is a great segue because we all know from statistics. Now, if you know me, that I'm a big data nerd and I love everything data. And so we know that it has been proven that more diverse teams, more minds, more thoughts that can round out the solution will understand a problem and then round out a solution to fix the problem has a indelible impact on the bottom line and the profits for business. But yet we're still struggling to break through to this concept. And the companies that get it are bearing the fruit of that. They are finding ways to improve their business. They're enjoying greater profitability. They're enjoying more revenue, more sales, more innovation, right? And then there are folks that are still lagging behind. And so what I'd love to start the discussion with today is, one, what environments have you seen in your careers, the three of you, where you have felt you've been a really part of a powerful team and it just clicked and it just got it and you just saw those things happen? I'd love to hear those experiences. And then I'd love to dedicate some time on why we think, we're not helping ourselves, why we think we're not going after that golden nugget, that obvious answer, right, to doing things better and doing things smarter. I'm going to start off with Jules, and then I'm going to go to Devon, and then Jitendra. But if organically we start to I would love to just jump into the conversation, but I'm going to have Jules go ahead and start it off.
I am going to struggle to talk about the work we're doing now and the team that we're building at my company. And the reason why is I don't want it to seem self-congratulatory or that I'm bragging. However, it is important that we all know that having been part of a toxic team, I decided to build my company. I'm very much about this idea that it is often in security more important the characteristics of the people than their experience prior. Mostly because cybersecurity is not a defined field yet. It actually is still developing. And therefore we're meeting new problems every day. So if you're trying to build a diverse team, you want different kinds of thought processes, different kinds of people who come to the table with different ways of looking at the same problem. So on the teams I build, I focus on the person who's highly analytical, someone who can take multiple areas of a problem, break it down, and actually provide and digest that information for reporting purposes. You also want someone who's an empath or empathetic, someone who can listen to the customer problem, who can interpret what they're saying and then communicate that forth. You want a writer, right? So it is my opinion that when I joined cybersecurity, it was all about how technical are you? And if you weren't technical, the thought was you did not have the amount of skill set or the needs, or you needed certificates in order to properly contribute. I now believe that the dedication of my company is to find people who ordinarily would be turned down by other companies, find a place for them here so we can work together to solve the problems as they develop. And that's really what my mission has been.
That's so important. And I think you should pat yourself on the back for that, Jules, because when there isn't a seat at the table, we make a seat at the table. We make our own table, right? And then that's when we build something really great and show others the example of what can happen when we take away that barrier of, I just want to be with other people that look like me.
Exactly.
Right? I'll tell you an example, and I'd love to hear from Devon and Jitendra if you've had a similar experience. But I remember being the only person in the room, of course this happens a lot, that looked a certain way, and had I have a background in business analytics and then security. Of course, I run security engineering at a global company that processes trillions of dollars of transactions. Mm-hmm. And even though that's true, and I run security engineering, I still get the "Are you technical?" question, which is irritating. But anyway, so we were in a room and we were trying to discuss this problem with a customer, not at MasterCard, but another client that I had, or a company that I was with. And what was interesting is that everybody else in the room had a similar background, and they failed to understand where that customer was coming from because they could not relate to them. They couldn't relate to them culturally. They couldn't understand, they just assumed that their security posture is what they've always seen, but they didn't have a background in financial services. This was a financial services client. They didn't have a background in this particular area of the world, and they couldn't understand why this client had so much irritation with what was happening. And it wasn't until someone thought enough to grab another mind, which was me, and brought me into the room that we started to be able to problem solve and ask that what if. And it was a very tangible moment in time where people said, you know what, we need someone else in here to figure this out. And so that's when they brought me in. And it would have been so much easier if I had already been there at the beginning. And the result of that was not only were we able to help that customer through the current crisis, but they also, then signed a 3-year contract afterwards, which was a great thing. But there was, and then, I became that person in front to handle that relationship afterwards, because I was able to build that trust with the customer. So Devon and Jitendra, have you ever had experiences in your career where you wish you would have been brought in first, or you wish you would have been part of the team first, or maybe you were part of the team that could have used more skill sets, that could have used more backgrounds?
So I'll go ahead, Devon, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So I've had a different sort of experience, right? I am from India, and it seems it is assumed like if you're from India, your IT technical capabilities are pretty good, right? And but I don't feel that I'm more of a business person. I'm more of a people person. I'm more of the type of person like who will try to understand what a customer's problem is, right? And I was working in a big 4 consulting firm, and they always thought, like in my review, I actually happened to talk to my superior, and in the review they told me that you lack confidence. I said, why do you think so? He said, you're technically very sound, but I said, but do you know what a technical architect actually is? So the perception that if you're Indian, you're technically very good. Yeah, I do understand. Like I understand how to bridge the gap between technology and business, like you do, and but the fact that I feel that there are technically more capable people out there who would give it a better thinking around the technical issues, where I can come from a customer perspective and talk about those things. So this is the type of uh, like uh, biases that we have about people, right? So it was never a lack of confidence. I actually laughed there. I said, do you even know what a technical architect is, right?
Yeah, I would not have pegged you for someone that lacks confidence at all.
So that's but again, this is how we feel about people, and I'm very happy that we are talking about, when we are talking about diversity here, we are talking about the technical diversities, right? Juliet
Yes.
talked about like what are the different skill set, and that is what we should be looking for in people, right? It's what are the different skill set they are bringing to the table for everybody to succeed together, and that's the important thing, right? Rather than how you look, how you appear, what your gender is. Those are things we should not even be talking about.
Oh, that's right. I can't tell you how many times I get asked where the coffee is.
Oh my goodness.
I have a great story about that too. I'll tell you in a minute. Devon, go ahead. Let me bring in a conversation I want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the points have been hammered home, and, I think we've all seen a number of companies have these sort of gaffes where, particularly in the retail industry, we've seen mistakes made where they've even tried to market to or service certain communities of people without necessarily having representation of those people in the room. And so there's this tone deafness, there's this misfire that happens. And I think that it can show itself not just in the retail space where you're directly engaging and marketing to customers, but obviously in the ways in which we formalize and build our teams. I luckily have been a part of really great organizations who've been very thoughtful about this body of work. And I think it is in part because of just the nature of what we're trying to accomplish in cybersecurity, and particularly as it relates to trying to protect ourselves from a wide swath of adversaries who come from all different backgrounds and regions of this world. We've naturally had the tendency to build our teams with that in mind. So, we're having to comb through, say, forums that are fully in Russian.
Yeah.
Of course, there's
Yeah.
translation services, right? But it's so much better to hire someone with that know-how and skill set, in part because they'll understand the nuance in those conversations. We've thought long and hard about, some of the kind of the technical attack paths that a hacker or adversary, I hate calling it a hacker, excuse me for that, some of the criminal actors would take. Understanding that there's various components there, and then there's people with skill sets, obviously in the cloud, people who've had a ton of experience with on-prem architectures, people who've thought long and hard about data security, about detection. We need all of the political components, the geopolitical landscape. I think, just naturally there's a tendency to want to grab from all this different skill set and know-how to help us come up with the most robust, comprehensive defensive posture possible. And so I've been very lucky in that regard, both to be a part of and to be at the helm of teams who've had that in mind.
One of the things that I have heard before, and I repeat it because I believe it so much, is that, talent, aptitude, passion, grit, that is evenly distributed in humanity, but opportunity is not. And if it takes all minds to solve this, why would we limit ourselves to just the people we feel comfortable with or that we're used to, when there are brilliant minds out there that we need, right? And we have to learn to seek and bring in a real and powerful way. So Devon, when we were talking before, you had some great insights into why we might not be doing the things that we need to do. And so tell me a little bit about that and some of the research that you've seen, and tell me what you think. And I want to hear from you too, Jules and Jitendra.
Yeah, I think that this kind of boils down to just how our brains work. Look, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've read a couple papers on this, and I think people have made it plain for folks like myself who are not necessarily immersed in that subject. But it's clear to me that, number one, we all have biases, and how those biases show up in our workspaces and the ways in which we craft our teams is interesting. So naturally, like, there's this familiarity bias. I tend to gravitate or align myself with people who are familiar to me, who I see myself in. It's actually quite interesting because there's a number of folks who are only helping people who remind them of their younger. And so they're not intending to discount and disenfranchise folks, but inevitably they're doing so. Think about how we recruit. We tend to recruit from schools that have prestige and we believe, are affiliated with certain cognitive abilities. And what we end up doing is discounting and disenfranchising folks who don't happen to go to those schools. But all of this kind of boils down to the human brain's natural resistance to change. If I were to kind of simplify this as best as I can, there's different parts of our brain that serve different purposes. And there's the prefrontal cortex, which is, I say, our conscious mind. This is the, kind of more data-driven, more information gathering and processing components of our brain. And then there's the kind of limbic system. This is our fight, flight, freeze responses. This is the stuff that we do that feels in many ways completely uncontrollable. And what happens in situations, and particularly when we're thinking about teams and particularly like change in this diversity and inclusion and belonging discussion, far too often we're reacting. And what that means, I think in the macro sense, is that, sometimes there are hard conversations associated with this particular body of work. And it's almost natural for people to get defensive. But what we have to do is find ways to interrupt the limbic system from taking over. And so sometimes there's, a shared vocabulary that your organization can have that I believe can be very helpful and helping interrupt us from going into those kind of natural, like, because if you change, it assumes it to be a threat. And so this part of your brain takes over. So it just reminds me to be very conscientious of the fact that this is happening in other people, and to be thoughtful about ways in which I can help them interrupt that process, and to look at the data, to be cognizant of what we know to be a fact-based, research-oriented view of how these changes can result in real outcomes for our organization.
That's a good point. What do you think, Jitendra or Jules?
Devon, you talk about neuroscience. That's pretty interesting, actually. And I was part of an exercise a few years back when I was working with the Latch4 company. And they had worked with a neuroscientist to come up, okay, what are the different styles of leaderships within the organization, right? And when they did the experiment, they were looking at more on leader style, still type based on are you a collaborator? Are you a guardian? Are you an innovator? Or are you a pioneer, right? So that is the type of, there was no ethnicity here. There was no thinking around which backgrounds do you come from. It was more related to what is going on in your brain from a chemical perspective, right? Which is very interesting. And I know people are trying to do work in that area. Like I happen to know a person who has started a small business around during the recruiting processes, people have inherent biases, like you talked about the familiarity thing, right? And these, even with the people realizing it, right, those biases come forth, right? And they don't know that, they don't intend to, but they don't know that themselves, right? But this is how we are, people are from different cultures themselves. This is how they are brought up. So companies are trying to understand what is causing that, and how do you go past it. So I see a lot of things coming out in the future which are going to address the issue. I would say it's more of an evolution, right? It's going on in the industry, and again, it's just that we are brought up in a certain culture, brought up in a certain way that is to be able to identify what that might and empathize with this is going to help us move along, right?
And I completely agree. So I've been listening to each of you. I think you are all correct. One of the challenges I see is we don't promote the people who think like this into the executive top leadership positions. In fact, we continue to promote people who have type A, they're very focused on the end result only. It's about the bottom line. And those people then are charged with setting the vision downwards. And what happens is they don't reward for people who can see the need for change, can mobilize and influence, or who have the ability to be conscious of other people. In fact, in organizations, that's seen as either a female trait, a soft skill, or it's seen as a man who isn't prepared for leadership. Every time I come across that in an organization, a very aware person, especially men, he is not in a leadership position. He's typically a very long-standing individual contributor, well-respected, but he is not at the top of the chain. So there has to be this honesty about what we're truly rewarding, because those are the things that get measured, monitored, and those are the changes you see. If we don't reward people for, and we talked about this before, for being a parent, because naturally managing multiple lives at the same time as you do your job shows resilience just in being able to do the thing. But if we don't for women because they may not be able to dedicate themselves fully to the job, then we're not taking advantage of the resilience we see. Over and over again, as I work with organizations to build out security culture programs, there's a lot of talk of what they hope the culture will be. We want healthy culture. We want work-life balance. We want our people to be more productive and to be happy. Great. So here's what it will take. It takes you giving people more time off. It takes you rewarding people for things that are not in their control, despite that. For instance, if you have someone who is, who has ability challenges and they can't make it to as many meetings physically, don't hold that against them. We need to find other ways to reward them or to measure them against everyone else. Every time we talk about the work, people back off and go, wait, that sounds like hard work. I can't do this right now. And so I become very frustrated with the conversation about diversity because it is an idea and a theory. I leave the office, I go home, mostly segregated neighborhoods, mostly people who are not friendly with people outside their background, geopolitical interests, and whatever it is. So if the outside world is not reflected inside and the inside of companies is not reflected outside, George Floyd dying doesn't matter, because in the end, we're all going to revert back to what we know consciously. We'll revert back to what our neuroscience tells us. It's fight or flight. And in the end, you get these very incremental changes. Everyone pats themselves on the back, and we continue to have the same problems over and over again. That is what we're facing. We've got to admit that even the way corporations are built, they're built on supremacy. There are some people that are believed to be more important, more valuable to organizations than we're willing to put down on paper. When we can start to admit that, then we can address it. But until then, this is all just a discussion.
So, that's this reminds me of a time where I was up for a new role at a certain company. I won't name, but and they were nominating me for a promotion, and I happened to, someone sent me the write-up. I saw the write-up, okay, and in the strengths column was all of these wonderful things. There was one weakness listed. The weakness has small children.
Wow.
Well, yes. So I tell that story because it happens, right? It happens. And I didn't get the position.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes. So, and thinking back to it, I was happy I did, and I got other things in other companies that were much, much better. But that happens, and it still happens. And so what I would love to talk about now is examples of things that are working, right? And things that have good intention, but maybe aren't working, and then things that just aren't working. As a data point, I love data. Devon, you mentioned psychological safety. And sometimes when I see things that are good intentions, they're like, oh, well, let's bring one person of color in. Let's bring, oh, I've got the token female. Oh, I've got the token whatever, right? But it doesn't solve the problem, because one, it'll stop there. And two, if, there is a study, and I'm blanking on the source, but I will follow up with it if y'all are interested. There's a whole book on this, that if you are if you are part of 25% or less of a group, that individual or those individuals are less likely to speak up in meetings because of psychological safety, because they feel self-conscious about that. Even subconsciously, they will be less likely to stand up and speak. And so I thought that was really powerful, because I thought back to a lot of the situations that I've been in, and I can see that happen, not just with me, but with other folks that might not be of the majority, including neurodiverse folks, right? Jules, you mentioned type A a lot. And, I see a lot of people get promoted that are type A. Yep. What about the folks that are highly empathetic, that can solve people challenges, even more so over than technical challenges? Why do the technical challenges never get fixed? Because there's always people behind it.
Yes.
And if we don't have the insight to figure out how to bring people along, if we don't have that skill set in the room, we're always going to be at the same problem, right? Same situation. So I'll open it up to the floor of who might want to talk about things that they've seen have worked, or maybe tried to work and failed because they forgot something or what have you. Let's talk about how we might be able to solve the problem, what company and organizations are doing, and what we could do better and what we should stop doing.
I'll say, I think Google and Netflix are doing a lot of great things with regard to hiring talented minorities, neurodiverse, and other types of people. Now, what I will admit to is not being familiar with the culture inside. But from what I'm seeing in terms of the recruitment and the hiring processes, they're attempting to focus on that area, and I see them doing a good job in that area. When it comes to other companies, big tech, I think what I like is that big tech is at a point where they have to recognize it. They're kind of being confronted with it. And so they're speaking much more louder and boldly about their need to fix the problem. Have I seen beyond that, the fix? I haven't. But I definitely think the first step is to admit you have a problem. So I've seen more of that lately.
Yeah, I mean, my commentary here really is that in the wake of George Floyd's murder, I do believe we're at an inflection point in our society. And I think for a lot of, I certainly say for a lot of Black folks, there's this sense that this is long overdue, and this is an experience that we've known for quite some time. But I think the pandemic plus, like the forcing of people to be home and pay attention, I think has really made people a lot more aware. Because even if you look at just the spectrum of folks that are a part of these coalitions that are asking and demanding change, it's just a chorus of folks that look very different than we've seen from times in the past. And so I'm very appreciative of that. Where I think given that outcry, a lot of companies have taken the position of making sizable commitments to invest in areas and in organizations that are advancing racial equity work, addressing kind of diversity, inclusion, belonging issues, both in the community, and then I see them obviously bringing in folks externally to at least engender more conversations about, and engender both more conversations, but then to also facilitate trainings on these topics. The data will have to prove to me that the training is actually meriting some meaningful outcomes. I think that awareness of your biases can be helpful, but I think Jules' point around incentives is probably more pressing than anything else. What do you incentivize? What do you allow? That ultimately is the largest determinant of what your culture is.
Exactly.
And so, I've seen some companies approach their lack of representation at certain ranks of the organization as a legit business problem. And so what they've said is, we're going to collect a ton of data, and we're going to even do our data collection like in a very quantitative manner, but we're also going to look at like heuristic type models. We're going to do like focus groups. We're going to really understand and try to unpack how people feel, not just kind of what we can denote or identify on paper, because there's always ways to splice and data or craft statistics to do what the confirmation bias, like I believe a certain thing to be true, and you can manipulate the numbers to help you feel better about what you already believe to be the case. And so I've seen companies start to take this approach where there's just much more intentionality, and the language that we're using is no longer soft. It is about edicts and declarations about our vision, both for the organization and for the ways in which we can serve our customers, and the mandate then to being able to accomplish and get to that vision requires that we take these actions now. The question is, like, do we have enough urgency around this work? And that, I believe, is to be seen. Obviously, with the commitments, people are tracking and watching closely to ensure that folks make good on those commitments. But I think we're kind of in a to be determined state. But I'm excited to see that this is part of the national dialogue, and believe that, you know, there's a springboard for us to really become change agents, and see to it that our organizations better reflect the talent across the spectrum of people.
Yeah, I also want to add, like, apart from companies doing, like, individualistically, what are we doing ourselves too? It's very important to realize that, like, and you try to get my name right, whether it is Chandna or Chandra, right? You're making that effort, and I appreciate that personally, right? Like in my name here, my name is Jitendra Chandna. It's written as Jitendra Chan, right? Because I think Chan is a very common Chinese surname, and she just assumed that Chan is my last name, but that's not true. And I did not have that change because I wanted that to be an example, right? Mm-hmm. Are we also making an individual effort to pronounce people's names? They are from a different culture. It's slightly difficult for us to do it, but are we doing it? Are we trying to empathize with them on how they feel? Like, people come from different, I've talked about it. People come from different backgrounds, different cultures. They're brought up in a certain way. They behave in a certain way, right? And then because of that, they have a certain like confidence issues or lack of confidence, or basically they don't come out because culturally it is. Do you as leaders try to understand that, right? Do you try to empathize with that? And if you do understand that, do you try to give opportunities those people to have a voice, right? That is also an important aspect. So, Juliet, you are talking about cybersecurity as a culture. That is the service you're trying. It's a service, right? Similarly, diversity as a culture should also be type of a service that some companies will try to bring it, right? And which is an important, because that is when people will understand these are different types of scenarios that we are faced with on a daily basis, which we don't realize. But we need to be cognizant of it. I think that will take time, that will take some practice. And but it is important. Like, I think John F. Kennedy said, like, think not what the country does for you, but what. So on an individualistic basis too, we should think, what do we do on a daily basis? How do we educate our children? How do we, so that when they come into the workforce, they realize those different and understand those differences and try to empathize with them and go beyond those, right? Look beyond those differences. That is an important aspect too.
So this has been a great discussion. You know, what I've heard in the last bit, that not only corporately, but individually, we have to act, we have to get teeth and incentives and actual action on the business aspect. There are companies that management compensation, and I mean management committee, board of directors compensation on whether or not they have a diverse executive team. And so I think that there is hope and direction in those types of stories, right? And those types of examples. But your true point, it's not just the big corporations that have to act, it's how we act individually. Do we say something when someone makes a joke? Do we say something when someone excludes or makes fun of another person? Do we actively try to bring people into the conversation? And I think just like security is everybody's job, bringing these minds in is everybody's job. And so I thank each of you for taking time on a Saturday afternoon in the summer to chat with me, to lend your voice, to add your voice to each other and amplify it for everybody else to hear. For the audience, I encourage each of you to have these discussions in your teams, to beat your own internal biases up, you know, to make sure that there's space for the conversation, because that's when goodness and change can start to happen. We're at time, but I'm going to give a round robin, 30 seconds. Any final thoughts? Jules, you start.
What I completely believe with Jitendra. I believe that it is incumbent on us to be honest about where we are, how we contribute, and then to hold our corporations and the people around us accountable for making other people feel like they belong.
Fantastic. Devon?
Yeah, I'd like to just raise the theory. It's called the emotional wake, but it's all about the residue that all of us leave on people. Given that our experiences, our interaction with folks can be very temporary. I always like to say few things and fewer people are meant to be in your life forever. The reality is, for every person that we encounter, we leave some type of residue on them. Is it aftermath? Is it aftertaste? Or is it afterglow? And so my question then is, how do you think about your interactions with people, no matter how short they are, and what you leave behind in that experience? And I think if we all are thoughtful about that, we'll see to it that these issues get resolved.
Awesome. Jitendra, any final thoughts?
My final thought is always try to do the right thing, right? And if you try to do it, will always good. Try to understand where you are, what the optimum solution for everybody is going to be around there, and try to do that, and that will help everybody around.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. I'll leave with the final thought that Jules actually brought up yesterday, and I'm going to give you credit for it, is that talking is important, but action is more important. So be part of that conduit for action. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great Saturday, everybody.